Chapter 1. The Bootstrap Mindset. Turning scarcity into an unfair advantage. Most people believe that building a business without money is a disadvantage. They imagine it as a journey defined by limitations, compromises, and the uncomfortable friction of trying to compete with better-funded founders. But in reality, scarcity has always been one of the greatest advantages an entrepreneur can possess. It forces clarity, it sharpens instinct, it exposes the essentials, and burns away everything else. When you don't have money to waste, you make decisions that matter. You don't guess, you don't drift. You learn to think like a founder who must earn every inch of progress with intention and precision. And strangely, those constraints often produce companies that are stronger, more focused, and far more resilient than the ones that started with excess capital. The bootstrap mindset begins with a simple truth: resourcefulness beats resources. The psychology of building with little or nothing is fundamentally different from building with plenty. When a founder is overfunded, decisions become bloated. Teams grow too fast. Experiments become expensive. Features multiply beyond necessity. Money hides problems instead of revealing them. But when you're bootstrapped, your judgment sharpens like a blade. You make choices that must stand on their own merit because there is nothing to cushion your mistakes. Scarcity demands rigor. It forces a level of discipline that later becomes your competitive edge. Consider the early days of Airbnb. Long before it became a global marketplace, the founders were broke, deep in credit card debt, and desperate to survive. They couldn't raise money. Investors didn't believe in the idea, and yet this lack of external support forced them to do what most funded startups never attempt: talk to customers, refine the product manually, test ideas quickly, and stay relentlessly close to the real problem. They even sold novelty cereal boxes to keep the company alive. That period of extreme scarcity didn't slow them down. It made them sharper. It taught them to validate assumptions with evidence, to understand their users deeply, and to avoid the trap of building features nobody wanted. If they had been overfunded, they might have skipped the humility and the discipline that ultimately shaped the company's DNA. The bootstrap mindset is a mental model as much as it is a strategy. In psychology, it aligns closely with constraint-driven creativity. The idea that limits don't restrict innovation, but provoke it. With fewer resources, your brain stops searching for extravagant solutions and starts exploring elegant ones. You choose smaller experiments, faster feedback loops, and cheaper ways to test demand. You focus on what generates revenue now, rather than chasing abstract future potential. You learn the skill that many founders never master: making progress by subtracting instead of adding. There is also a deeper emotional strength forged through this process. Bootstrapped founders learn to tolerate uncertainty with unusual resilience. They become comfortable operating without a safety net. Each win feels earned, not given. Each lesson is embedded through experience, not paid for with capital. And as the business grows, this resilience becomes one of the strongest compounding assets you possess. Investors often say they prefer to back founders who have been through difficult environments because hardship refines character in ways money cannot. When you learn to build under pressure, you learn to lead under pressure. Economically, scarcity also creates efficiency. Bootstrapped companies tend to reach profitability sooner. They optimize for cash flow instead of burn rate. They understand their unit economics earlier, and they rarely fall into the trap of scaling prematurely. There's a reason so many successful software companies, from Basecamp to MailChimp, were built without venture capital. Scarcity trained them to be lean, focused, and customer-obsessed long before the market rewarded them for it. If having too little money feels like a burden, it's worth remembering that many of the world's most durable companies started exactly where you are, with nothing but a vision, a few customers, and a founder determined to outlearn and outmaneuver the competition. Scarcity is not your enemy. It is the condition that forces greatness to emerge. And as we move into the next chapter, we'll explore something equally powerful: the psychology behind spotting opportunities others can't see, and why constraint-driven founders often see the world with clearer eyes than those who begin with abundance. Chapter 2: The Economics of Zero-Cost Opportunity. Finding value hidden in plain sight. Every founder dreams of stumbling onto a brilliant idea, some lightning strike insight that nobody else has recognized. But the real art of entrepreneurship is rarely about discovering something new. It's about noticing what everyone else has learned to ignore. Zero-cost opportunities rarely look impressive at first glance. They hide beneath inefficiencies, in broken workflows, in outdated assumptions, and in markets that seem too small, too boring, or too unscalable to attract attention. And yet, these overlooked pockets of value often become the most profitable places to build. To master the economics of zero-cost opportunity, you must learn to see the world differently. Instead of asking, "What big idea should I pursue?" the bootstrap founder asks, "Where is value leaking? Where is friction high? Where is the customer's pain already begging to be solved?" These questions don't require capital. They require awareness. They require curiosity sharp enough to spot the hidden asymmetries that others walk past every day. You begin to view the world as a series of inefficiencies waiting to be rearranged, like a puzzle whose pieces have been carelessly scattered. A powerful mental model for this kind of thinking is arbitrage of attention. Markets become inefficient when people stop paying attention. A neighborhood cafe with terrible reviews that nobody bothers to fix. A niche online community underserved by any real product. A local service provider still relying on outdated technology. These gaps exist because the people closest to the problem are too busy, too familiar, or too emotionally attached to see the opportunity. Outsiders, hungry, observant, unburdened by assumptions, often see what insiders overlook. And because the opportunity is hidden, the cost to capture it is usually astonishingly low. Consider the story of Spanx. Before Sarah Blakely built a billion-dollar apparel empire, she was simply a frustrated consumer who noticed a glaring inefficiency. Women were improvising shapewear solutions because no product truly solved the problem. The underpriced market wasn't defined by the manufacturing. It was defined by the lack of attention from established brands. They dismissed the problem as trivial. Sarah didn't. Her insight required neither funding nor technical expertise. It required the ability to notice an obvious gap others had mentally filtered out. That is the essence of zero-cost opportunity. The same dynamic plays out in digital markets. Think of early YouTube creators who built channels around topics traditional media ignored, or software founders who took unglamorous niches, plumbing, lawn care, logistics, and built tools that made these industries run smoother. These were not million-dollar ideas at the beginning. They were small frustrations turned into scalable value. And because they were ignored, the founders who solved them enjoyed the benefit of entering markets without competition. Another mental model useful here is inefficiency inversion. Whenever you see long waiting times, complicated paperwork, unclear pricing, outdated websites, or a lack of modern tools, you're looking at a market with invisible margins. Customers are already paying, in time, frustration, and energy. If you can remove that friction, even in a tiny way, you unlock value without spending much money. This is why zero-cost opportunities often start with service businesses or simple tools. You're not inventing demand, you're redirecting it. But spotting these opportunities requires emotional discipline. Most people overlook them because they don't look glamorous. They aren't the kind of ideas you can brag about at networking events. They feel small, almost embarrassingly simple. Yet simplicity is exactly what makes them powerful. Small ideas carry less risk, require less capital, and can be tested quickly. And as you gain traction, you can layer complexity only where the market proves it necessary. Over time, founders who train themselves to recognize these underpriced pockets develop an unfair advantage. They see opportunities everywhere. A confusing checkout process becomes a potential consulting offer. A slow, outdated business becomes a candidate for modernization. A passionate online community becomes a fertile ground for a niche product. The world becomes a map of solvable problems. In the next chapter, we'll build on this idea by exploring how constraint-driven thinking evolves into something even more powerful. The ability to craft a value proposition that doesn't just solve a problem but makes your business fundamentally impossible to ignore. Chapter 3. Story before sales. How to build belief when you have nothing to show. In the earliest days of any venture, before the product exists, before the website is polished, before there is proof to point to, founders often face a quiet and uncomfortable truth. Nobody cares yet. The market is indifferent. Customers have options, partners are cautious, and investors, if you even seek them, prefer certainty over possibility. In this fragile phase, most founders assume they need a finished product to earn trust. But the opposite is true. The most powerful asset you have before anything exists is the story you tell, a story that makes people believe. Not in the product you're building, but in the future you're creating. Story precedes sales because belief precedes action. In psychology, this dynamic is called commitment priming. When people emotionally align with a narrative, they become more receptive to the solution that follows. Humans trust what they understand. They support what they feel connected to. And they root for what feels meaningful, even if it's still unfinished. The bootstrap founder, with no glossy pitch decks or impressive traction, must master the art of narrative clarity, of painting a picture vivid enough that others can step into it. A powerful example comes from the early days of Tesla. Long before the company had delivered a single mass-market vehicle, Elon Musk wasn't selling a car. He was selling a mission: a world beyond fossil fuels. A vision of transportation reinvented. Investors didn't buy into the prototypes, they bought into the story. Early customers didn't place deposits because the product already existed. They did it because they wanted to be part of the future it represented. The story carried the weight of the company long before the engineering caught up. For smaller founders, the principle is the same. A compelling narrative has three components: the problem, the promise, and the personal commitment. First, articulate a problem so clearly that your audience feels its weight, not with jargon, but with emotional specificity. Second, present a promise, a future state where this problem is transformed. And third, express the personal motivation that makes your pursuit believable. People don't invest in ideas. They invest in the conviction of the person solving the idea. This approach taps into another psychological principle: credibility through coherence. People trust stories that make sense internally. If your narrative flows logically from problem to solution, if your mission aligns naturally with your background, if your ambition feels grounded in necessity rather than ego, your credibility grows, even if your resume doesn't. Founders often underestimate how powerful coherence is. Authenticity is not about telling everything, it's about making everything fit. One of the most underrated techniques in early-stage storytelling is what I call borrowed momentum. When you have no traction yet, you borrow momentum from insights, trends, or lived experiences that validate your direction. You don't say, "We have nothing yet." You say, "Here's what we've learned. Here's what we've observed. Here's the shift we're positioned to serve." You transform your lack of resources into a sense of discovery. You invite people into the building process, giving them a role in shaping what's coming next. Case studies abound. Patreon began as a story about the broken economics of the creator economy. Dropbox started with a narrative about the pain of lost files long before the product was refined. Even Airbnb's earliest pitch wasn't about renting rooms. It was about human connection and belonging. In each case, the story arrived before the sale. The narrative created the context that made the product inevitable. For the bootstrap founder, mastering storytelling is not optional. It's the bridge between obscurity and momentum. When you tell a compelling story, you unlock early believers, those first few customers who forgive imperfections, those early partners who extend trust, those initial supporters who amplify your message. These believers become your foundation. They give you the oxygen you need to build. And as we move into the next chapter, we'll explore the next layer of this early stage alchemy, how to turn those early believers into your first wave of traction, transforming narrative into measurable, sustainable momentum. Chapter 4. Build fast, spend nothing. The tactical playbook for lean, scrappy execution. Every founder dreams of momentum. That moment when an idea becomes real enough for others to feel it. But momentum doesn't come from perfection. It doesn't arrive after months of isolated building or polishing something no one has seen. Momentum comes from speed, from getting your idea into the world before your doubts, your fears, or your excuses have time to slow you down. The bootstrap founder must master the discipline of building fast while spending almost nothing, because time and creativity are your most abundant resources when money is not. Lean execution begins with a shift in mindset. You don't need a product to test a product. You need a hypothesis. Every early stage idea is an assumption waiting to be proven or disproven. Instead of disappearing for 6 months to build something polished, you create the smallest possible test that reveals whether customers care. In psychology, this approach aligns with rapid validation loops, a framework where learning happens through action rather than planning. You build something simple, you show it to real people, and you gather feedback before you've invested much more than your energy. Consider how Dropbox validated its idea. Before a single line of the core product worked reliably, Drew Houston created a simple demo video showing how the system would function. The video wasn't a product, it was a prototype of belief. When thousands of people joined the waitlist, the team had their answer. The demand existed. That single scrappy test saved them years of building in the wrong direction. It also revealed something every bootstrap founder eventually learns. Speed saves money, precision saves years. Scrappy execution relies on another powerful mental model: resource substitution. Instead of buying software, you use free tools. Instead of writing custom code, you use no-code builders. Instead of renting an office, you work from your kitchen table. Every obstacle becomes a puzzle. If you can't buy your way forward, how can you creatively maneuver instead? This is where constraint-driven founders thrive. They don't ask, "How do I build the whole thing?" They ask, "What's the smallest version that tests the truth?" Early traction often comes not from building more, but from talking to customers sooner. The fastest growing bootstrapped companies, ConvertKit, Gumroad, Buffer, didn't launch polished platforms. They launched Google Forms, static images, sketches, and scrappy landing pages. They messaged potential users directly. They sold before they built. This approach taps into a principle known as commitment before creation. When people express even a small commitment, an email sign-up, a pre-order, a message saying, "I want this," they reduce your risk long before you invest your time. Even prototyping can be done for almost nothing. A Figma mockup can replace months of engineering. A Loom video can replace a full product experience. A rough PDF can replace sophisticated digital features. The goal is not to impress, it's to learn, to expose your assumptions to reality before reality exposes your assumptions. But lean execution is not only tactical, it's emotional. Moving fast means facing the discomfort of imperfection. It means showing unfinished ideas and risking rejection. For many founders, This vulnerability is harder than the work itself, yet this discomfort is your advantage. While others hide behind planning, you build. While others wait for perfect timing, you publish. While others overthink, you test. The market rewards movement far more than it rewards polish. Once you start getting feedback, the next step is iteration. Not massive rebuilds, but small, quick, directional changes based on real data. This is the heart of lean execution, the humility to adapt in real time. Bootstrapped founders survive not by predicting the future, but by responding to it faster than anyone else. And as we transition into the next chapter, we'll explore the next evolution of scrappy momentum. How to turn early validation into leverage, scaling what works, cutting what doesn't, and building a company that grows not through luck or funding, but through compounding insight. Chapter 5: Momentum Without Money. Growing a business through creativity, community, and compounding. There comes a moment in every founder's journey where the excitement of early validation runs headfirst into a concrete wall. Growth demands resources. Traditionally, this is where people assume money is the only fuel powerful enough to push a company forward. But bootstrapped founders know a different truth. Momentum doesn't come from capital. It comes from creativity. It comes from community. It comes from the compounding effects of small actions amplified over time. When you have no money, you learn to build not through force, but through leverage. The first form of leverage is partnerships. A well-chosen partnership can collapse the timeline of growth from years into months. In economic terms, partnerships convert someone else's distribution into your opportunity. You don't need a marketing budget when you can collaborate with someone who already has the audience you want. The earliest days of YouTube were fueled not by paid acquisition, but by embedding partnerships with MySpace and blogs. Instagram didn't grow through ads. It grew through the creative community that showcased their photos everywhere. When money is scarce, relationships become assets. Every founder should ask, who already has the trust of the audience I want to serve? And what value can I create for them? The next pillar of cashless growth is social capital, the invisible currency of reputation, goodwill, and reciprocity. Founders who operate without money rely heavily on credibility and generosity. When you help others without expecting anything in return, you create a psychological debt called reciprocal bias. Humans feel compelled to support those who support them. Many early entrepreneurs build traction simply by solving small problems in their communities, offering value publicly, and showing up consistently. Over time, people begin to advocate on their behalf. They recommend them. They share their work. They include them in opportunities they otherwise couldn't access. Social capital is slow to build, but incredibly powerful once it compounds. Then there are network effects, the forces that turn small movements into movements. A network effect occurs when the value of your product increases as more people use it. But most founders don't realize that network effects can begin long before the product is fully formed. Communities, online or offline, are the earliest and purest version of a network effect. Consider Notion. Before it became a productivity giant, it quietly cultivated a community of passionate early adopters who created templates, tutorials, and workflows. Each contribution added value to the ecosystem. The community wasn't an audience, it was an engine, and engines don't require investment to run. They require participation. Creativity also plays a critical role in momentum without money. Scrappy founders design clever incentives that turn customers into evangelists, referral loops, exclusive early access, insider groups, shared ownership of the mission. These are forms of behavioral economics that amplify growth without spending a dollar. Dropbox famously used a simple incentive: free extra storage for referrals. That single mechanic fueled explosive user growth at a cost far lower than traditional advertising. The brilliance wasn't the reward, It was the alignment. Users wanted more space. Dropbox needed more users. Incentive and desire overlapped perfectly. The final ingredient is compounding. Momentum without money doesn't come from one big push, but from dozens of small, well-placed actions that stack over time. A weekly email becomes a newsletter. A handful of active users becomes a community. A partner conversation becomes an ongoing collaboration. Each layer strengthens the one beneath it. Bootstrapped founders learn to think in terms of compounding relationships, compounding content, compounding trust. Over months and years, the slow layers eventually become a flywheel, heavy at first, then unstoppable. But perhaps the greatest advantage of growing without money is that it forces a deeper alignment with your market. When you can't buy attention, you must earn it. When you can't pay for distribution, you must create something worth sharing. When you can't outsource growth, you must build something that grows naturally. And this natural growth, forged under constraint, often creates stronger, more loyal, more durable companies than those built through sheer financial force. As we move into the next chapter, we'll look at what happens after momentum takes hold, how to sustain it, stabilize it, and transform it into long-term durability. Because early growth is one thing, but building something that lasts is an entirely different discipline. Final chapter, the founder who starts anyway. At the end of every entrepreneurial journey, after the tactics are learned, the frameworks understood, and the mindset sharpened, one truth remains unchanged. Nothing matters until you begin. The greatest companies in history were not born from perfect plans or abundant resources. They were born from founders who started anyway. Founders who looked at their limited capital, their imperfect ideas, their uncertainty, and chose movement over hesitation. They stepped forward, not because they felt ready, but because they felt called, and that willingness to begin, despite everything, is the real blueprint of entrepreneurship. Throughout history, constraint has been the birthplace of brilliance. Disney started during the Great Depression. Apple started in a garage with barely a few spare parts. Patagonia began with used climbing gear and handwritten catalogs. These companies didn't emerge from ideal conditions. They emerged from necessity. They grew because their founders chose action when the environment told them to wait. Psychology calls this activation energy. The courage to take that first step creates momentum that transforms potential into reality. It is the emotional spark that makes the impossible feel reachable. When you operate with limited resources, something powerful happens. You learn to see opportunity differently. You become sharper, faster, more inventive. You stop relying on money as a crutch and start leaning on clarity, discipline, and creativity. Constraint becomes your teacher, pushing you to focus on what truly matters. Every decision counts. Every experiment teaches. Every conversation reveals insight. This is not a handicap. It is the very environment where entrepreneurial instincts are forged. The founder who starts anyway understands that resilience is not a trait you're born with. It's built through repeated exposure to uncertainty. You learn to navigate doubt. You learn to keep going when the path is unclear. Every obstacle becomes a shaping force, carving out stronger judgment, deeper patience, and a capacity for adaptation that cannot be taught in theory. This resilience becomes your competitive advantage long before revenue ever does. And then there is resourcefulness, the quiet superpower of those who build with less. Resourcefulness is not merely the ability to solve problems. It is the instinct to look for solutions others overlook. It is the mindset that says, there must be a way, even when no obvious path exists. Bootstrapped founders become masters of leverage, using partnerships instead of budgets, communities instead of marketing, creativity instead of capital. They turn limitations into strategy. They transform constraints into catalysts. This entire journey from scarcity to momentum reveals a deeper truth about entrepreneurship. The power you need is already within reach. You do not need permission. You do not need perfect timing. You do not need abundant resources. What you need is a story worth telling, a problem worth solving, and the relentless willingness to take the next step, even when the outcome is uncertain, because the boldest breakthroughs rarely appear in the beginning. They appear after consistency compounds, after your skills sharpen, after your idea meets the world again and again, each time becoming stronger. As this book closes, your own beginning opens. You stand at the threshold where every founder begins, with a mix of excitement, uncertainty, ambition, and questions about whether you're truly ready. But readiness is a myth. Progress begins the moment you move, the moment you test your idea, the moment you send that first message, create that first draft, or share your story aloud. That moment is the quiet spark that separates those who dream from those who build. Your constraints are not obstacles, they are signals. They are the environment that will shape your creativity, your resilience, your character, and ultimately your success. The tools are in your hands. The blueprint is in your mind. The opportunity is right where you stand. And now the question shifts entirely. Not can you build something meaningful, but will you take the step that every great founder once took? The step into the unknown, where your story truly begins.